It says the main subject is the history of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Now, when Israel and Judah were split, there was the northern and the southern part of the kingdom of Israel over there. So you had Judah and you had the two different kingdoms in Israel and Judah. So they're split. It says from the latter part of the reign of Ahazah in Israel and Jehoram in Judah, it says after the time of captivity. It says as far as the history of Israel is concerned, it is a dark picture of degenerate rulers and sinful people ending in slavery. So what is the common theme of the children of Israel? The common theme is what? They sin, God rebukes them, they come back to Him, they sin again. It's just a cycle that goes on. Well, guess what? That's me and you, right, in our lives. We're on top, we fail, God convicts us, we confess, and we're back on top again. So this circle that we see with the children of Israel through the Bible, it's part of our life too. And this is what it's talking about. It says as far as the history of Israel, there's been concern in a dark picture of degenerate rulers and sinful people that ended in slavery. It says the kingdom of Judah was also on the downgrade. So what happened is Israel was taken over first of all, and then about 136 years later, Judah was overtaken, or Jerusalem was overtaken. So we've got some time, a lot of time has elapsed in this book. It says the kingdom of Judah was also in a downgrade. It says, but the judgment was not visited upon her speedily because of her influence of a number of good kings who reigned during this period. It says, see an analysis in 2 Chronicles. It says the interest of the book largely centers around the record of the lives of two prophets, Elijah and Elisha. And here's the interesting thing. The spiritual message of this book is the powerful influence of the rulers upon a nation. And I wanted to show you this morning, but I can't get the internet, it's not working here. Has anybody seen the email going around that has the president should take a walk? The walk in Washington? Have you seen that?
I tried to pull it up.
Well, I looked at it, and it is pretty interesting. It's a guy talking about, he's got some quotes from Obama about we're no longer a Christian nation, that we're a Muslim and Hindu and Buddhist and we're all this other stuff. And, you know, it's got some things, but it's interesting. It takes, if he was to leave the White House and go down to the monuments and to Jefferson and to the, you know, all these, but it makes an exact picture of the cross.
Wow.
And it's got, and all through that, talks about these men talking about God and how we're a nation we're a Christian nation. We're a nation that trusts in God. We're founded on God. So, but if you see that email, pull that up. Now, if we can get it next week, I'll try to show it to you. But it's a pretty interesting thing that this guy does, and he quotes Obama all through this thing. But I guess what interested me about it is the influence of our leaders upon a nation. And it leads to their downfall. And that's what this book is about. So with that in mind, let's talk about the disciples, or the disciplines. God disciplines His people. One thing that Corley pointed out, he says, if I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. Have you ever heard that before? Who'd you hear it from? Your mom. You did. If I've told you once, if I've told you 1,000 times. And then comes what? Some instruction that we were able to do well? Probably not. Right? So that's kind of the pretext of where it started. And he talked about the responsibility of a parent to hold us accountable as their children. My responsibility to my daughters to hold them accountable. If I tell them to do something and I don't hold them accountable, what happens? I've just created a what? A tough situation for who? For me and for the child. You school teachers, how many children do you know in your school that are screaming for somebody to explain to them what no means? To tell them no and mean it. I really believe there's so many, the problem part of our country is we have so many parents that tell kids, some don't tell them no at all, but the ones that do say no don't mean it. And that's a problem. Because they did it anyway, there was no repercussion. Well, I promise you, ask my daughters. If I told them no, and they did it, I busted that tail for them. Just like my mama did mine. And so I appreciate that. The older I've got, the more I appreciate the fact that my mom and daddy didn't lie to me. When she said, Chris, if you do it, then that's what happened. So just keep that in mind. It says, God has much patience and gives us guidance. Sometimes it takes strong discipline. Why? Why does it take strong discipline? Because we're what? What are we? We're strong-willed, aren't we? Sometimes we want what we want no matter what. You know, and I deal with that a lot in my work with the people that I deal with. They want what they want. Strong discipline. had a situation this week that's a little off subject, but it's really on subject. Had one of the managers in one of the stores doing what he wants to do and not what the dealer wants him to do. Well, I'm the mediator. So I go to him and I say, why are you doing that? Well, here's why I'm doing it. So I go to the dealer and say, well, here's why I'm doing it. The dealer said, hang on just 1 minute. He calls me in the office and says, here's why you're not going to do it the way you want to do it. Here's why you're going to do it the way I want you to do it, because one, I own this place. Well, guess what? God owns this place. Right? And when he tells us to do something, we need to do it, whether we like it or not sometimes. So, all right. So with that in mind, let's look at in chapter 17, verses 7 through 11, talking about acknowledgement of sin. Now, last week's lesson, which we didn't have, was where God told David about the temple and that he was going to let Solomon build the temple. So we're kind of leading up to this. So in verses 7 through 11, talking about acknowledge the sin. It says, For so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, which had brought them out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of the Pharaoh king of Egypt, and had feared their other gods, and walked in the statutes of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel, and the king of Israel, and they had made. It says, and the children of Israel did secretly those things that were not right against the Lord their God, and they built them high places in all their cities, from the tower of the watchman to the fenced city, and they set them up images and groves in every high hill, and every green tree, and under every green tree. And there they burnt incense in all the high places, as did the heathen whom the Lord carried away from before them, and wrought wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger. Precious Heavenly Father, one more time, we're going to ask you to come. Speak to our hearts right now, Lord. Help us to look at this personally, God. Help us to understand what the children of Israel did, God, on a continuing basis, and understand that we're just like them. We are them. And Lord, we need to be prepared to do battle, Lord, that we can be solid and focused, Lord God, and understanding you, Lord, and looking for you on a daily basis. Thank you for what you're going to do this morning. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. An interesting thing that I made note of. Look in verse 17. It says, For so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God. Now, from that point on to the end of the verse, look at what it says. Which had Lord their God, which had brought them out from the land of Egypt, from under the land of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they had feared other gods. You could have taken that little section. I put parentheses around it because it's really not necessary to communicate what he was saying in the passage. It's a matter of emphasizing something. So I could read this and say, For as it was, the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, and go on to verse 8, and walked in the statutes of the heathen, and skip that little last part. Does that make sense? So when I see stuff like that, I highlight it in my Bible because I think it's important. God put it here for a reason. So look what it says. So he's talking about that they had sinned against the Lord their God, which had brought them out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods. Why would he put that in there? Why does the writer put that in there for us? Give me some ideas. What do you think he's trying us to see about those few little lines? He says, go back to what he said, For it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God. Stop. And then he goes on and he gives us a little more emphasis. He stops his thought and wants us to draw us back to say, which had brought them out. So God had brought them out of the land of Egypt. He had brought them from under the hand of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Why would he say that? Why did he stop and put an emphasis on this?
Remind them what he had done for them.
To take them back. To take them back to where? Where they were. To take us back and remind us of where he brought us from. So many times in life we get high and built up, and God's taken us to this great spiritual place. We're on this great mountaintop spiritually, and sometimes we forget where we came from. Because the greatest downfall that I think the devil uses in this world is pride. I think that's his number one weapon, is pride. The minute he can pat me on the back and get me thinking I instead of God, I'm in trouble. So I saw that and I highlighted, so understand that he's trying to get us to focus here on remember where you came from. And he goes on in verse 8 through 11 to give more information. So a couple of things I made note of. It said after Solomon's death, the kingdom was divided. It's like we talked, the kingdom was divided into Israel and into Judah. So when Solomon died, that's when the kingdom was split. We had one kingdom, then it was split. And that was in 931 BC. In 722, the Assyrians overthrew Samaria, which is Israel. And 136 years later, Babylon took over Judah. So it was out of God's discipline. This was part of God's discipline. on the people. That he had his kingdom reestablished, they had the temple, but the people did what again? He talked about images and did what they wanted to do and did the things that they loved, and they got high and mighty and they got off track once again. So now God's had to bring his wrath once again on the people, and said instead of gratitude and obedience, the people chose sin and idolatry. And that word sin in that passage simply means missing the mark. So make it that simple. We talk about sin sometimes and we put this big S-I-N out there, but sin is not necessarily all capital letters. It simply means missing the mark. So think about that for a minute. Simply missing the mark. We just had Vacation Bible School. Could we have missed the mark this week? Just play it out for a minute. Let's play devil's advocate for a second. Could it be that we could have had 26 kids saved this week if we hadn't missed the mark? So I guess when I see stuff like this and I start thinking about God's discipline, I start thinking about my life and how I'm supposed to play into this thing, is I always need to be on guard. Although we see great and mighty things happen, we had 6 kids saved, could we have done it and could we have had more saved? We don't know the answer to that. But if we keep asking that question, I think it'll keep us in the right frame of mind. Does that make sense? Not that we didn't have a great week and we had 300 people, not 350 registered and an average of 230 or something like that, Brother Danny or Hank said this morning. That's awesome. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of opportunity. But could it have been that I put myself, because I was at the daycare one night and did the close, could it be that I was not spiritually prepared to do what I did? Could it be that I was more focused on work and on self or whatever, that I wasn't really prepared to share the part that I shared? I don't know. But if we continue to ask ourselves that question, never be satisfied that we've arrived, continue to dive in and work, then I think we can avoid the situation that the Israelites are in at this point in time. He goes on in verses 12 through 15, he talks about heed God's warning. He continued to write here. It says, for they served idols, whereof the Lord said unto them, ye shall not do this thing. It says, yet the Lord testified against Israel and against Judah. Obviously, both of them years apart, but he testified against both of them by all the prophets and by all seers, saying, turn ye from your evil ways, and keep my commandments, that my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, which I sent to you by the servants and the prophets. We have enough. Think about the history of this church. You think about your life. Who are the mentors in your life? He just told them to go back there, and he says what? I command you of your fathers, in which I sent you by my servants and by my prophets. There are servants and there's prophets in your life that you hold fast to, I would think. There's spiritual leaders in my life I go back to. I think about Sam Jester is one of them. I think about my outside of my family, my father and my mother, Sam. I think about Paul Cooper. I think about James Martin. I think about Don Stevens. And now I've got Danny Dodds, and I've got some of you men in this room, and some of you people in this room that, y'all have spiritually challenged me and engaged with me spiritually and challenged my spiritual life that I want to be more. And we work together and we become, but in your life, there's people in your life that you go back to, and you've got things in your life that you appreciate from those people. So always go back to that sometimes and just kind of draw strength from who brought you to where you are in this life. Verse 14 says, notwithstanding, they would not hear, but hardened their necks. Look, they hardened their necks like the neck of their fathers that did not believe in the Lord their God. And they rejected the statutes and his covenants that he made with their fathers, and his testimonies which he testified against them. And they followed vanity. Listen, they followed vanity and became vain, and went after the heathen that were round about them, concerning whom the Lord had charged them that they should not do like them. Pay attention. Pay attention. I think about God's laid these guidelines for us. He's given us a very black and white road to follow down, if we will. But so many times our self enters into it, and we will not heed God's warning. We go out there and we do it anyway because he's educated us. We know it's wrong. We do it anyway, and then we have a downfall in our life, and we look up and we say, what? Why me, Lord? God, why did you let this happen to me? Why am I having these struggles, Lord? And we created the trauma ourselves. So the lesson talked about heed God's warning. It's one thing to know that's wrong. It's another thing to go against what is wrong. And then what are you going to do when God calls your hand on it? That's what I run into all the time. Back to my job a little bit. When I call somebody's hand on something and they get caught, what do? What happens? If somebody breaks a rule, you catch them at it, and they do what?
Blame it on somebody else.
They blame somebody else. They get mad at you, and I'm just the one that's having to state the facts. I'm the one in the position that has to hold you accountable, back to that accountability thing. Well, that's God. And how many times in life do people get angry with God? When God smacks them in the side of the head and says, wake up. And all of a sudden they blame him, but they created the situation that God had to do something to get their attention. Because if we don't heed God's warnings, what do we expect? One thing I can promise you that ain't going to happen. He's not going to let you continue down that road of sin and disobedience. And sin and disobedience. He's not going to let you continue down that road. Sooner or later, He will get your attention. He will get my attention. He will get our attention. So, this is important stuff. He goes on in verses 18 through 20. This is where the lesson closes out. It says, learn from God's discipline. Verses 18 through 20. It says, therefore the Lord was angry with Israel and removed them out of His sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah. And we know that because there was 136 years difference between when they both fell. Judah was still in pretty good shape because they did have some good leaders. In verse 19 says, also Judah kept not the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the statutes of Israel, which they made. And the Lord rejected all the seed of Israel and afflicted them and delivered them into the hand of the spoilers until He had cast them out of His sight. Now I hope we don't get to that point that God cast us out of His sight. I'm not talking about losing your salvation. This is about your fellowship with God, not your relationship with God, that He cast you out. And in the book, and I just thought about this passage, in the book of Hebrews, it talks about your light not being able to shine your light, not shining your light anymore. And what that's talking about is talking about your testimony. It is very possible for you and me to ruin our testimony to the point that it no longer shines for the Lord. He can't use us. And that's something we need to be mindful of every single day. Is my light, one, is it bright? Or is it dim because of sin? Does it shine for the Lord? And can people see God in me? So I wrote down a couple things. I wrote down discipline does what? If discipline does this, it shows the Father's love in my mind. I think back to the children thing. You know, I gave my daughters, I disciplined them because I loved them. I want them to do the right things. I want them to learn. I want them to mold them, to make them, pillars of society. I want them to have some structure in their life. I want them to be respectful. I want them to do the right things. So it showed that I love them. Discipline molds the children. Back to those kids that you teachers deal with in school. I mean, your hands are tied. The government has tied your hands to do what needs to be done to some of those kids. I remember I've had that paddle across my rear end at CBL school a time or two. Mm-hmm. I wasn't my fault. I just got caught up in the wrong crowd. That's right. It wasn't me, Ralph.
You gotta blame it on somebody else.
Somebody else. I still don't like that principle for busting my tail. Discipline also creates fear in a good way. I think the reason they didn't do some of the things is because they feared the wrath of dad or the wrath of mom. So that fear is a good thing. We need to fear God. The problem in this world is we don't fear God. We don't believe that He will destroy us. Just like the children of Israel and Judah and Israel did not believe it. If they would have believed it, they wouldn't have done it, right? If they would have believed it, they wouldn't have been into idolatry. If they would have believed it, they would have listened. If they would have believed it, they would have responded. But they didn't, so He finally put them back into captivity from the Assyrians and from the Babylonians. So the same thing in our life. We don't believe that God's going to do what He said He'll do. Creates fear in a good manner. It creates understanding. All of a sudden, there's this new understanding. Back to Sydney. I keep pointing to her. I had to bust her tail over when I did Devin's. Devin understood no a little quicker than Sydney did in life.
She was sneaky too.
Yeah.
Debbie did quietly. She didn't get caught.
So but listen to this. But think about what it does. The moment I had to correct one of my daughters, I won't single Sydney out anymore, and I had to bust that tail. You know what? It created a new understanding between us. Does that make sense? There's a new understanding of now. She has a good understanding of, you know what? There is repercussions. There are rules. There are accountability. And there's repercussion if I don't follow the rules. But on the other side, if I do follow the rules, there's positive reinforcement. Because I'll be honest with you, I'm blessed. I've got two daughters that have never, the stories that I hear of parents that I talk to about the terrible twos in the teen years, I don't have a clue what they're talking about. I don't have a clue. They've never defiled me or Anita. They've never come against us. I've never had to go get them out of jail. And he's sitting here, and I thank the Lord for Luke. He's one of the reasons. Because they've been together ever since they were in high school. And went through those teen years, they went through them together. Not that we all had differences and had to have some conversation from time to time. And, you know, he wanted to live at my house when he was 13. I didn't want to live in my house. So, but you know, I just thank the Lord for a Christian family, and I've got daughters, and now I've got Luke, that they understand when we don't let them go places and do things together, when they're too young to do things together. We'd go out to eat and see some of their friends sitting at Theo's by themselves and no adults going to the movies. I mean, there's no place out here for a 13, 14-year-old girl or a couple girls to be sitting at Theo's eating supper by themselves going to the movie, and no parental, you know, they're creating their own problems. The parents are creating their own problems by putting their kids in these positions to get hurt. And I'd never tried to put my daughters in a position to get hurt. That was my job as a parent. So, anyway. Now, if there is no discipline, I just simply wrote down it destroys lives. If there's no discipline, I could sum it up. It just destroys lives. If there's no rules, just leave it. It's all mayhem. Just go out and do what you want to do. You know what? It's a free country. There is no God. There is no rules. Do what you want to do. You know, I don't know. And I've talked about, me and Dave have talked about this before. More so on Devin's side than Sydney's side. But when she got to high school, I think she wrote all her friends off in Elkin, North Carolina. She wrote Elkin, North Carolina off because they got into drugs, alcohol, sex, all the things, all the above. Saturday night, she had no place. She didn't want to go home. She stayed with us. And when she graduated from high school, we could have took her straight to Charlotte and dropped her off at Wingate. She'd been tickled to death because she became a new woman. In about 6 weeks, I didn't even know who my daughter was. She was confident. She fit in. She found her way. God put her in a place down there that He's just changed her life and turned her into a beautiful person. We always knew that anyway, but you know what I'm saying? She changed dramatically because I think she made a conscious decision based on hopefully the guidance that we'd given her from when she was small, that, you know what, I choose not to participate. I really think she made that decision early in her life, just like these two have made the choice not to participate. They got friends, they can tell you, drugs, alcohol, the whole deal, sex, it's all out there, it's all right there. But I'll never forget, and I'll quit talking about my kids. We took Devin to Wingate, and they had a panel. They separated the parents and the kids for orientation. And they had a panel of about 4 or 5 kids up there, they were seniors. And one parent said, how did you stay away from the drugs and the alcohol, blah, blah, blah. And this is a Christian school. It's there anyway. It's in all the schools, right? And one girl, very eloquently, couldn't have said it any better. She said, we simply chose not to participate. She said, I don't care where your daughter goes to school or your son goes to school, it's there. Don't bring them to a Christian school thinking you're keeping them out of it. It's going to be right in front of them. The key is, will they choose to participate? Now, back to us this morning. Do we choose to participate? That's what happens. God give us the rules. We got to stop. We got to play by God's rules and not the world's rules. And understand that His discipline is real. It's very real. And it's very harsh. Depends on how far down the road you come to how harsh it is. Anybody got anything you want to add?